Before sunrise, the gates begin to move. One by one, thousands of metal doors slide open across a vast concrete complex that stretches farther than the eye can see. Guards stand above narrow corridors. Loudspeakers echo across the blocks. Inside the walls are tens of thousands of men. Each one has a number. Each one has a cell. And each one is part of a system that many people around the world have never seen before. Some former inmates gave this place a chilling nickname. They called it the Cemetery of the Living Dead. Not because people were buried here, but because many who entered felt their lives had already ended. This is the story of the world's largest mega-prison, the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola. How did one prison grow so large that it became a city of inmates? And what really happens inside a place built to hold more than 6,000 prisoners on 18,000 acres of land? To understand why this prison earned its haunting reputation, we first need to understand how it was created. The plantation that became a prison. In the early 1800s, the land that would one day become Angola Prison was not a correctional facility. It was a plantation. The land sat along a bend of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. The soil was fertile, and large farms grew crops such as cotton and sugar cane. The plantation was named Angola because many enslaved people brought to work the fields were originally taken from the region of Angola in West Africa. After the American Civil War ended in 1865, slavery was abolished across the United States. But the plantation system did not disappear overnight. Instead, the land eventually came under control of the Louisiana state government, which began using it in a new way. By the late 1800s, the property was turned into a state prison farm. Prisoners were brought to the land and required to work the fields. For decades, the prison operated using a system known as convict leasing, where incarcerated people were forced to perform hard labor for little or no pay. Conditions during this time were extremely harsh by modern standards. Historical records describe overcrowded housing, limited supervision, and dangerous working environments in the fields. Over time, Angola developed a reputation as one of the toughest prisons in the United States. The prison grew larger and larger as more buildings were added across the massive property. By the mid-20th century, Angola had become something very different from a normal prison. It was no longer just a facility. It had become an enormous prison community with farms, workshops, housing blocks, and thousands of inmates. But the size of the prison created another problem. Because Angola was so large and so isolated, controlling it became extremely difficult. And in the decades that followed, the prison would face some of the most serious security problems in its history. Those events would eventually force the entire system to change. But the turning point had not yet arrived. A prison too large to control. By the 1950s, Angola had grown into something few prisons had ever become. It was no longer just a correctional facility with walls and cells. It was an enormous prison complex spread across thousands of acres of land. Prisoners lived in multiple camps across the property. Many worked in the fields growing crops. Others worked in maintenance, kitchens, or workshops. Because the prison covered such a large area, supervision was difficult. At the time, there were far fewer guards than inmates. In many places inside the prison, officers could not see everything that was happening. This created a system where prisoners were often left to manage daily life among themselves. Historical reports later described how some inmates gained control over housing areas and work groups. Without strong oversight, intimidation and power struggles sometimes developed inside the prison population. For years, Angola struggled with serious management problems. Public attention began to grow when journalists and investigators started reporting on conditions inside the prison. Newspapers described overcrowded dormitories, poor sanitation, and a system that seemed outdated compared to other prisons in the country. One event in particular forced the public to pay attention. In 1951, a group of inmates took a drastic step to protest conditions inside Angola. Several prisoners injured themselves in a coordinated act meant to draw attention to their situation. They wanted the outside world to notice what was happening behind the prison walls. The story spread quickly across the United States. Suddenly, Angola was no longer just a prison hidden in rural Louisiana. It had become a national controversy. State officials could no longer ignore the growing pressure. Investigations were launched. Journalists visited the facility. Lawmakers began asking difficult questions. The prison system now faced a major decision. Either Angola would continue operating under its old system, or it would have to undergo serious reform. The years that followed would determine the future of the largest prison in America. And those changes would reshape Angola in ways no one inside the prison had expected. The reform that changed Angola. By the 1970s, Angola had reached a critical moment. For decades, reports had described serious problems inside the prison. Overcrowding, poor conditions, and weak supervision had created an unstable system. But change did not happen quickly. Instead, pressure slowly built from multiple directions. Journalists continued publishing reports about Angola. Civil rights organizations began examining prison conditions across the United States. Courts were increasingly willing to review how prisons treated inmates. Then, legal action began to reshape the system. Several lawsuits were filed arguing that conditions in Louisiana prisons violated constitutional standards. These cases forced state officials to confront long-standing problems. Federal courts began demanding improvements. Prison administrators were ordered to reduce overcrowding, improve medical care, and increase supervision. But Angola faced a major challenge. Because the prison was so large and isolated, reforming it required more than small adjustments. It required a complete change in leadership and philosophy. That change came in 1995, when a new warden took control of Angola. His name was Burl Kane. Kane would become one of the most influential figures in the prison's modern history. When he arrived, Angola still had a reputation as one of the most dangerous prisons in the United States. Violence had been a persistent problem for decades, and the prison population included many inmates serving life sentences. Kane believed the system needed a different approach. Instead of relying only on strict control, he began introducing programs aimed at education, work responsibility, and structured daily routines. New training programs were developed. Religious services expanded. Inmates were offered opportunities to learn trades and participate in organized activities. Supporters of these reforms believed the new programs helped stabilize the prison environment. Critics, however, questioned whether the changes went far enough. What no one could deny was that Angola was entering a new phase. The prison was still enormous. It still held thousands of inmates, and it still housed some of the most serious offenders in Louisiana. But the system inside the prison was beginning to shift. Yet one difficult reality remained. Many inmates at Angola were serving life sentences with no chance of release. For them, the prison was not temporary. It was permanent. And that reality created a unique psychological environment inside the massive prison walls. Life sentences and a permanent prison population. By the early 2000s, Angola had become one of the most unusual prisons in the United States. Not because of its size alone, but because of the people who lived there. A very large percentage of Angola's inmates were serving life sentences. Many had no possibility of parole. This meant something very different from most prisons. In many correctional facilities, inmates eventually leave. Some are transferred. Others are released after serving their sentences. But at Angola, thousands of inmates knew they would never return to life outside the prison walls. For many of them, the prison had effectively become their permanent home. Over time, this created a unique prison culture. Some inmates began building routines that looked very different from the image people often have of prison life. Many worked long hours in the agricultural fields across the massive prison property. Others worked in maintenance shops, kitchens, or construction crews. Some prisoners even trained service dogs that were later given to people with disabilities. Educational programs expanded as well. Angola developed training classes where inmates could learn carpentry, welding, and other trades. Perhaps one of the most unusual developments was the creation of a theological seminary inside the prison, where inmates could study religion and later serve as mentors to other prisoners. Supporters of these programs believed they helped create stability in a prison where many people would never leave. Critics argued that the system still reflected the difficult history of prison labor and long-term incarceration in the United States. Despite the debate, Angola continued to operate as one of the largest prison communities in the country. The prison had farms, roads, housing blocks, administrative buildings, and entire work areas spread across its vast property. But there was one thing about Angola that most people outside the prison never saw. Unlike most correctional facilities, Angola also hosted an event that drew thousands of visitors from outside the prison every year. An event that turned one of the world's largest prisons into something almost impossible to imagine. A place where civilians entered the prison grounds voluntarily, and where inmates became the center of a massive public gathering. The event was known simply as the Angola Prison Rodeo. The Angola Prison Rodeo. Every October and April, something unusual happens inside Angola. Cars begin arriving from across Louisiana and neighboring states. Families line up outside the prison gates. Vendors set up booths. Loudspeakers echo across a large open arena. Then the gates open. Thousands of visitors enter the grounds of Louisiana State Penitentiary. For a few days each year, one of the largest maximum security prisons in the United States hosts an event known as the Angola Prison Rodeo. The rodeo first began in 1965. At the time, prison officials were looking for ways to raise money for inmate welfare programs and provide structured activities inside the facility. The idea was simple but unusual. Inmates would participate in rodeo competitions while the public watched from the stands. Over time, the event grew larger. Today, the Angola Prison Rodeo is often described as the longest-running prison rodeo in the United States. Thousands of visitors attend the event each year. Inside the arena, inmates compete in traditional rodeo-style challenges such as bull riding and horseback events. Many prisoners also sell handmade crafts, leather goods, artwork and furniture in a large marketplace set up inside the prison grounds. The money earned from these sales goes into inmate accounts, which can help support daily living expenses while they are incarcerated. For prison officials, the rodeo serves multiple purposes. It provides a controlled event where inmates can participate in organized activities. It also raises funds that support educational programs and inmate welfare initiatives. For visitors, the rodeo offers a rare opportunity to see the inside of one of America's most well-known prisons. But the event has also been the subject of debate. Some critics argue that allowing inmates to perform in a public event raises ethical questions about entertainment and incarceration. Others believe the rodeo helps humanize prisoners and provides opportunities for positive engagement with the outside world. Regardless of opinion, the Angola Prison Rodeo has become a unique part of the prison's identity. It is one of the only events in the world where thousands of civilians enter a maximum security prison voluntarily. Yet the rodeo represents only a small part of life inside Angola. Because when the crowds leave and the arena becomes quiet again, the prison returns to its normal reality. Thousands of inmates living behind the walls of one of the largest prison systems ever built. And inside that enormous system, another complex issue has continued to shape Angola's history. The question of aging prisoners who may never leave. The prison that grew old. As the years passed, Angola began to face a new challenge that few prisons had experienced on such a large scale. Its population was aging. Because so many inmates were serving life sentences without the possibility of parole, many prisoners were growing old inside the facility. Some had arrived at Angola decades earlier. Over time, their hair turned gray. Their physical strength declined. Health problems became more common. By the early 2000s and 2010s, Angola had one of the largest populations of elderly inmates in the United States. This created a new set of responsibilities for prison administrators. Prisons were originally designed to hold people for limited periods of time. They were not built to function like long-term care facilities. But Angola was slowly becoming something close to that. Medical services had to expand. New hospital units were created inside the prison. Specialized staff were required to care for inmates with serious health conditions. Some prisoners who were once considered dangerous were now elderly men who needed assistance walking across the prison yard. In response, Angola developed programs where inmates could help care for older prisoners under staff supervision. These inmate caregivers assisted with daily tasks such as moving wheelchairs, helping with meals, and supporting prisoners who needed physical assistance. Supporters of the program said it helped maintain order and created a sense of responsibility among prisoners. Critics raised concerns about relying on inmates to provide care within a prison environment. But one fact remained clear. Angola had become a place where many prisoners would grow old and eventually die inside the prison walls. For those serving life sentences, the outside world slowly became a distant memory. Years turned into decades. New prisoners arrived. Older prisoners passed away. And the massive prison continued operating across the same land that had once been a plantation nearly 2 centuries earlier. Yet even with reforms, programs, and new policies, Angola still carried a powerful reputation. The nickname that some inmates once gave it had never fully disappeared. A place so large, so permanent, and so isolated, that some prisoners believed it felt like a cemetery for the living. But to fully understand that reputation, we need to examine one final reality about Angola. Its place in the wider debate about justice, punishment, and prison systems in modern society. A prison that shaped the debate on justice. Today, Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, remains one of the most well-known prisons in the United States. Its size alone makes it extraordinary. The prison sits on roughly 18,000 acres, making it larger than many towns. Inside its perimeter are housing units, farmland, workshops, medical facilities, chapels, roads, and administrative buildings. More than 6,000 inmates have lived within its walls at different points in recent decades. But Angola's significance goes beyond numbers. Over time, the prison has become part of a much larger discussion about how modern societies manage crime and punishment. For many years, Angola symbolized one approach to criminal justice: long sentences, strict control, and permanent incarceration for serious offenses. Supporters of this system argue that maximum security prisons serve an important purpose. They protect the public by securely housing individuals who have committed serious crimes. Critics, however, have raised different concerns. Some question the long-term impact of extremely long prison sentences. Others point to the financial and social costs of maintaining large prison populations for decades. Angola often appears in these debates because it reflects many of these issues in a single place. It holds thousands of inmates, many serving life sentences. It operates on land with a complex historical background. And it continues to evolve as prison policies change across the United States. Researchers, journalists, and policymakers have studied Angola for decades to better understand how prison systems function at such a large scale. Some focus on rehabilitation programs developed inside the prison. Others examine the long-term effects of incarceration on individuals and communities. For the inmates living there, however, the debate is not theoretical. Angola is their daily reality. Every day, thousands of men wake up inside one of the largest prison complexes ever built. They follow routines, work assignments, and schedules inside a system that has been evolving for more than a century. Outside the prison walls, public discussion continues about how justice systems should operate in the future. But inside Angola, the gates still open each morning. The loudspeakers still echo across the yard. And the prison continues operating on the same land where its long history first began. For more than a century, the land known as Angola has carried a complicated story. What began as a plantation in the 1800s eventually became the largest maximum security prison in the United States. Over the decades, thousands of men have passed through its gates. Some served their time and left. But many others remained for the rest of their lives. Inside Angola, time moves differently. Years turn into decades. Entire generations of inmates grow old within the same walls. The prison has seen reforms, investigations, new programs, and changing leadership. It has been studied by journalists, historians, and policymakers trying to understand how large prison systems function. For some, Angola represents the harsh reality of long-term incarceration. For others, it represents the ongoing challenge of balancing justice, accountability, and rehabilitation within modern society. What cannot be denied is its impact. Few places reflect the history of American corrections as clearly as Angola does. A prison built on land with a difficult past, that grew into a vast system housing thousands of people, and continues to shape conversations about punishment and reform today. Understanding places like Angola helps us understand a larger question facing societies around the world. How should justice systems respond to serious crime while still recognizing the long-term human consequences of incarceration? That question continues to be debated far beyond the prison walls. And Angola remains one of the most powerful examples of that discussion. If you found this documentary informative, consider supporting the channel. Like the video, subscribe for more real prison and crime documentaries, and share your thoughts in the comments. And let us know where you're watching from. Because stories like this remind us that behind every prison system are real histories, real policies, and real human lives.